السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, brothers and sisters. Inshallah ta'ala, after the Sunnah prayers, we will be continuing our halaqah series on the Islamic perspective on critical thinking, discussing the work of Ibn Hibban and Busti, Rawdatul Aqala. Inshallah ta'ala, so I encourage everyone to join us after Sunnah prayers. Jazakallah. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. بسم الله الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه ومن والاه. اللهم أعلمنا ما ينفعنا وزدنا علما. آمين يا رب العالمين. So inshallah ta'ala, we're continuing our discussion on Islamic critical thinking. And we've introduced the book a number of times, but for those who are new, this is a work by one of the great hadith scholars of Islam, the Imam Ibn Hibban al-Busti, who is a scholar who died 354 years after the Hijrah of the Prophet Muhammad. So he lived more than 1,000 years ago, and yet the insights that he has gathered in this book about the intellect and about the nature of wisdom are still relevant for us 1,000 years later. And he was born in Bust, which is modern-day Restream in Afghanistan. He traveled 40 cities over 40 years, gained knowledge from so many different scholars. All the way from Afghanistan, he traveled to Egypt, he traveled to Hijaz, he traveled to many places. He came back and he taught. He is known for having compiled the Sahih of Ibn Hibban, which is a book that collects the authentic hadith, and he also compiled this book as well, inshallah. So as in the traditional methodology of the scholars, we are going to read from the book and we'll stop and comment on it, and I will connect it with some of the things that we've been talking about before, inshallah. So we have Shafai is here, going to recite from the book.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. مقدمة الإمام ابن حبان رحمه الله. الحمد لله المتفرد بالوحدانية الإلهية، المتعزز بعظمة الربوبية، القائم على نفوس العالم بآذانها، والعالم بتقلبها وأحوالها، المان عليهم بتواتر آلائها، المتفضل عليهم بشوادر نعمائها، الذي أنشأ الخلق حين أراد بلا معين ولا مثير، وخلق البشر كما أراد بلا شبيه ولا نظير، فنضت فيهم بقدرته مشيئته، ونقذت فيهم بعزته إرادته، فألهمهم حسن الإطلاق، ورتب فيهم تصعد الأخلاق، فهم على طبقات أقدارها يمشون، وعلى تفاقد أخلاقهم يدورون، وفيما قضى وقدر عليهم يهيمون، وكل حزب بما لديهم فرحون.
So, the Sheikh, Imam Ibn Hibban, he begins, as is the custom of all the scholars of Islam, they begin with the praise of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. As scholars of Islam, they also mention that from the introduction, you can get a hint at what the Sheikh is going to be talking about. And we mentioned last time that he begins with the foundations of Tawheed. And he mentioned two of the categories of Tawheed. What are the two categories that he mentioned? Who remembers? What are the two categories? Yes. Uluhiyya and Rububiyyah. Now, interestingly, he puts Uluhiyya first before mentioning Rububiyyah. So, normally, when people teach, they normally mention Rububiyyah first rather than Uluhiyya. Rububiyyah means that Allah is the sole creator and sustainer of the universe. Uluhiyya means Allah has the right, the full right to be worshipped. That Allah is the ultimate priority in our lives. That we make dua only to Allah. That we seek help only from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That our ultimate obedience belongs to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That there is nothing in our lives more important than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now, why would he put Uluhiyya first before Rububiyyah? There's a connection to the subject matter, which is the topic of the aql. Because of its relevance to the concept of the aql, part of the aql is to know your priorities of life. And Uluhiyya is about your actions, right? It's about the actions of the servant. It's about the servant making Allah the priority in their life. So he begins by talking about what is the absolute and ultimate goal for the human being, because that is part of the intellect. The intellect is knowing what is the absolute goal worth striving. And when we compare the concept of the intellect between the West and between Islam, between liberalism and between Islamic thought, between Islamic civilization and between secular modernity, we talked about how the Islamic understanding of the intellect is grounded in moral values. We have a value structure which dictates for us how we use our intellect, how we think, and how we are able to achieve the fruits of the intellect. And what we talked about in secularism, the intellect is detached from morality. You can be a very smart person, doesn't say anything about whether you're an ethical person. And therefore, we see some of the consequences of that. There are people who are educated, people who have all the fancy terminology, people who are very sophisticated in the way that they speak, but they're justifying things that are absolutely unethical. Because the intellect has not been formulated in a way that allows people to produce ethical thought and to engage in ethical action. So there's a disconnect that's happening. So for us, Tawheed is the foundation. And so he mentions, that he begins by saying, all praise to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, who is the sole one who possesses al-uluhiyyah. He is the one who is the absolute foundation. And every action we do in life is with the understanding that we are striving to please Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Everything that we do is for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So we understand that we were created in this life with a goal. And that goal is to serve as a Khalifa on this earth, as moral custodians on this earth. We have priorities. So there's an ethical dimension to our aql right from the beginning, based on our understanding of Tawheed. And he mentions that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one who is great in his rububiyyah, in his worship. The one who is in charge of the lifespan of everything in this world. The one who is completely knowledgeable about all the affairs and the condition of everything in this world. The one who is continually bestowing his blessings upon all of the beings in this world, all of the human beings, all of his creation. The one who created the human beings, who created his creation when he willed, without any help, without any assistance. The one who created the human being as he willed, without any light, without any comparison. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created human beings according to his divine decree. And this also again connects to the concept of the aql. One of the most important things for the intelligent person is to understand the concept of divine decree. So this is a big difference between the Islamic paradigm and atheism. The paradigm of godlessness, materialism. When you understand the Islamic worldview, and you understand Iman bil Qadr, you understand belief in divine decree, every single thing that happens to you in your life is incredibly significant and meaningful. Because in every event in your life, there is wisdom from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So, you go to the masjid, you meet somebody at the masjid you haven't seen for a long time, you say, SubhanAllah, why did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala want me to meet this person today? What is the benefit? Maybe I will make dua for this person. Maybe it will remind me to come to the masjid more often. Maybe it will remind me about the benefits of the community. But you know that there's no such thing as a true coincidence in life because everything is planned perfectly by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So even seemingly trivial occurrences in our life have meaning and significance to them. Now contrast that view with the view of atheism, the view of materialism, where the universe is just the consequences of chemical reactions, chemical interactions, particle interactions, and it's the unintended consequence. Even the biggest events in our life are absolutely meaningless at the end of the day. They're pointless. Right? Something that seems to be deeply significant, at the end of the day, it's just because this particle bounced into this one and this particle bounced into this one. At the end of the day, there's no higher meaning to it. There's no rhyme or reason behind it. So when you have that outlook of Iman bil Qadr, it changes the way in which you are able to extract meaning from your life. And what's interesting is today psychologists talk about this. So there's a psychologist his name is Robert Emmons, Professor Robert Emmons, and he coined the term spiritual intelligence. And when we talk about intelligence, people talk about IQ tests. Usually the IQ test is just testing a small range of what is intelligence. Looks at your ability to do some geometrical problems, some linguistic problems. That's really good intelligence. But actually, there's a huge range of what is part of the aql. Included within that are things like emotional intelligence, moral intelligence, and yes, spiritual intelligence. Now, it's interesting that a non-Muslim psychologist, secular, is talking about the importance of spiritual intelligence because you can't escape this concept. Even if you try to leave religion behind, you can't escape the concept of spiritual intelligence. Why does he talk about it? As a positive psychologist, he's looking at how human beings can have meaning in their life. And you notice that some people, They are able to derive meaning from the events in their life better than others. Some people are able to understand what is happening in their life better than others. Some people are able to put the pieces together to have a vision for themselves in life, to have resilience, to go through difficulties and hardships better than others. So there's a concept there of spiritual intelligence, he calls it. Spiritual intelligence. And he says, yes, this is a capacity that human beings have. But even, a secular person can accept that there has to be a spiritual intelligence, but then how do you train it? We don't know, right? That's what they'll say. We don't know. We don't have a way, a curriculum, a source of guidance to train this spiritual intelligence. For us, Islam, the revelation, the divine revelation, is what develops and trains spiritual intelligence.
وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله فاطر السماوات العلى ومنشئ الأرضين والثرى لا معقب لحكمه ولا راد لقضائه لا يسأل عما يفعل وهم يسألون.
So, one of the things you'll notice is that he brings in the quotations of the Quran, and this was something that you'll find throughout the works of Muslim scholars. The Quran is the basis of how they're discussing these different concepts. And then he begins by mentioning the Tawheed, right? Mentioning La ilaha illallah. There's none worthy of worship except Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The one who created the lofty heavens, the one who brought about the worlds, the earth. And here comes the interesting question. Why did he mention earth, world? Is there more than one world? What do you guys think about this? What does Islam say? Are there other worlds besides this? Besides our world? Are there other beings on other worlds? Yes. Okay, yep, there's jinns. Excellent. Very good. What else? Could there be other worlds with aliens? What does Islam say about aliens? Where are the kids? What does Islam say about aliens? Interesting question for the kids. Yeah. Doesn't confirm or deny? Okay. Right. So in the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions in Surah Allah is the one who created the seven heavens and from the earth a similar number. So that's why he's mentioning the earths. Right? From the earth a similar number. Now this verse, Abdullah bin Abbas, he said that in each earth is an Adam like your Adam, a Noah like your Noah. He was mentioning this, right? So he's mentioning that in each earth, in each world, there is creation that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made. What exactly this means? Allahu a'lam, right? But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made many different species. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made many different beings. This is just one verse that the scholars use to prove that there are these other creations. There are others, verses in the Quran where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَمَا بَثَّ فِيهِمَا مِن دَابَّةٍ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created the heavens and the earth, and what He has spread within both of them of creations, right? Including in the heavens. Yeah. Right. Right, so is this the multiverse, right? The multiverse too. So they have people have many different interpretations of the multiverse, right? In the multiverse, some people have the idea that there is you, exactly like you, but somebody who made a slightly different choice, right? Every time you have two possibilities, they say that both occur but in separate universes. Now, Islam does not necessarily affirm one specific possibility like this, like the multiverse theory. That's a theory, Allahu a'lam whether it's true or not. But certainly there is a concept that there are other worlds, other dimensions, you could say multiverse if you want, whatever terminology you use. This is from the Ghaibiyat, right? These are from the matters of the unseen. But we know that there is creation beyond our creation. The creation beyond the human beings, beyond the realm, the observable realm that we can see. So what this gives the intelligent person is a sense of humility. Even on our earth, right? If you go to a museum or an aquarium, look at the percentage of species that have been discovered compared to how many species are undiscovered. Even on our Earth, we've only discovered a fraction of the species, a fraction of the creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So where does this arrogance come? Right? The human beings now have this arrogance that, oh, we figured out everything, right? This attitude is actually not in keeping with the attitude of an aqil, somebody who is intelligent, somebody who has spiritual intelligence and also has humility, and recognize how much is beyond the scope of their knowledge. In the story of Musa and Khidr, in the hadith, it's mentioned that when Musa and Khidr were on the boat and they were crossing the river, they witnessed a small bird, a sparrow, come and dip its beak into the water to drink. And Khidr said to Musa, "O Musa, your knowledge and my knowledge combined." These are the two most knowledgeable human beings on the earth at that time. Your knowledge and my knowledge combined in comparison to the knowledge of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is like what this bird has taken with its beak from the water. Above everyone who has knowledge, there is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala who is the most knowledgeable. So this is one of the things that we get from this as well. I don't want to go into the story of Khidr alayhi salam right now, but yeah. Yes. So every single thing that happens is according to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's plan, but there's a wisdom behind it. And even when things happen that are bad, there's an opportunity for us to do good. So it's just from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or a trial of some sort, or Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is expiating sins, or Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will reward that person in the afterlife. Whatever there is, there's divine wisdom behind it. So everything that happens, there's divine wisdom behind it, but we believe everything goes back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's will. However, from the etiquette of the believer is to attribute only what is good to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and to attribute what is bad to ourselves and to our shortcomings, our sins. And to recognize that we don't attribute it to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala because it's either a result of our sins or shortcomings, or it's an opportunity for us to do good. So it goes back to our responsibilities. So that's why even in the story of Khidr alayhi salam, you'll notice when it's something mentioned that is purely good, like Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells the world that collapse, for the orphan, and then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, the Khidr alayhi salam mentions, فَأَرَاكَ رَبُّكَ, your Lord willed, that they would reach maturity and that they would be able to get the pleasure. When it was something that is purely bad, he attributes it to himself. فَأَرَدْتُ أَنْ أَعِيبَهَا, I will to puncture a hole in the boat. And when it's mixed, when it's the one child is dead, and Allah is replacing with another child, so there is an evil and there is a good, so he says, فَأَرَدْنَا, we will. So you see, even the etiquette of how to speak about good and evil, the Quran is teaching that, and it's the Quran is
وأشهد أن محمدا عبده المجتبى ورسوله المرتضى بعثه بالنور المبين والأمر المرضي على حين فترة من الرسل ودروس من السبل فدمغ به الطغيان وأكمل به الإيمان وأظهره على كل الأديان وقمع به أهل الأوثان فصلى الله عليه وسلم ما دار في السماء طلع وسبق في الملكوت ملك وما سبق في الملكوت ملك وعلى آله أجمعين.
So, and then he mentions, and I bear witness that Muhammad is his chosen servant, and the messenger with whom he is pleased, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent him with light that is illuminated. We mentioned that the understanding of his of knowledge, of understanding of intellect from the Islamic perspective, is that it is light. It is not just information. This is a big difference again. Right? We talk now about the information age. People think, oh, you have access to Google, you have access to ChatGPT. What do you need the intellect for? Right? We can abdicate our aql. We don't need our aql anymore. We have artificial intelligence. Information is there. The aql is not just information. This is a very important point. In fact, the companions of the Prophet Muhammad themselves mentioned this point. Abdullah bin Mas'ud said, لَيْسَ الْعِلْمِ بِكَثْرَةِ الرِّوَايَةِ. Knowledge is not just having lots of narrations, lots of information. وَلَكِنَّ الْعِلْمِ, what knowledge actually is, نُورٌ, it is a light that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala casts into the heart. It is a light that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala throws into the heart of a person. The light is something that illuminates. It changes the way you see things around you. It changes the way you see events. It changes the way you see the trajectory of your own life. It changes the way you are able to see guidance around you. It changes the way you are able to recognize the signs of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala all around you. وَكَأَيٍّ مِّنْ آيَةٍ فِي السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ يَمُرُّونَ عَلَيْهَا وَهُمْ عَنْهَا مُعْرِضُونَ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions in Surah Yusuf, how many are the signs in the heavens of the earth that they walk right past and they turn away from them. The problem is not that there's no signs. The problem is not that there's not enough evidence, there's not enough proof. The problem is people don't have the understanding, the mindset, the paradigm to recognize the truth, to recognize the signs that exist all around them. So this light that we acquire from immersing ourselves in the guidance from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, training our mind, conditioning our mind to recognize what is guidance, and to recognize what are the signs. This light is what allows us to recognize the truth and to see it all around us. And he mentions that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent the Prophet Muhammad with light and with a command that Allah is pleased with in the gap between the messengers. So it's understood there was a gap, there was a fatra between Isa and the Prophet Muhammad. The scholars generally say that there was no prophet that was sent in this period of time. Now, Allahu A'lam, whether this means there was no prophet specifically sent to the nations that we know about or in the entire world. That's a different question. We know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَإِن مِّنْ أُمَّةٍ إِلَّا خَلَا فِيهَا نَذِيرٌ. There has not been a single ummah, a single nation, a single civilization, except that there has been a warner to them. So we believe that every nation, every civilization, every culture received at some point in its history a prophet. But between Isa and the Prophet Muhammad, the scholars of the time, they mentioned there is this fatra. This is something that is mentioned in the Quran as well. That there was a gap. Is this a gap just for the people in the Middle East, just for the Semitic people, or is it around the world? Allahu A'lam. This is something from the very. But there was this gap, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent Prophet Muhammad, who is the final messenger, and the Prophet Muhammad said explicitly, لا نبي بعد. There is no prophet after me. This is an article of Faith for Muslims. Now, he mentions the Prophet Muhammad demolished sources of oppression and injustice. The message of the Prophet Muhammad demolished the sources of oppression. And we've been talking about how some of the sources of oppression in the world come from the ideologies that are man-made ideologies that people have built. The different thought structures that lead human beings to subjugate others. Thought structures like colonialism, thought structures like secularism, thought structures like atheism. These are different ways of thinking, functional patterns of thinking. We mentioned that one of the professors, not Muslim professor, called them psychoepistemic disorders. These are disordered ways of thinking and viewing the human being and its place in this world that lead to colonialisms and genocides. They lead to unethical activities. They lead to sources of oppression in the world. So the Islamic worldview gives us a worldview that allows us to build true ethical action, to cultivate true moral development in our lives. وَأَكْمَلَ بِهِ الْإِيمَانِ. He perfected Iman, and we mentioned that the concept of Iman, we talked last time about how the Fitra leads us to Iman, but the Wahyi, the revelation, guides it and completes it. And that is what the prophets did. And this is the message that became dominant over other ways of life. How did Islam achieve that dominance? Right? Historically, Still today, historians are puzzled. How is it that within 30 years after the death of Prophet Muhammad Islam spread from east to west and became a global superpower in 30 years? Look throughout human civilization, look throughout the records of human history in any part of the world, and tell me where such a similar transformation has happened. In such a short period of time, that entire superpowers were changed in the world. The Roman civilization, the Byzantine civilization, and the Persian civilization went from being the world superpowers to now being on the defensive and being basically completely erased from a huge portion of territory that they had under their rule, and now Islam becomes the dominant civilization in the world. In a period of just 30 years since the death of the Prophet Muhammad, you have Islam spreading from North Africa all the way to India and China. It's absolutely unbelievable. And people from all these different cultures embracing Islam. And the early scholarship of Islam then becomes not just Arab, it goes into other cultures, such that we look at, the early scholarship of Islam, we have so many non-Arabs, including Persian scholars of Islam. And Sibawayh, who formulated Arabic grammar, is Persian, right? So even the founding of Arabic grammar and its formulation and codification is coming from someone who is non-Arab, which is incredible. So you have all of these people bring their cultures to Islam and be enlightened by the Islamic message and become part of the Islamic message. And then you mentioned that through this, the Prophet Muhammad erased the sources of idolatry in the world. So may the peace and blessings of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala be upon our beloved messenger as long as the constellations revolve in the skies, and as long as the angels glorify him in the heavens, and may they be upon his noble companions and all those who follow in his footsteps. So this is the beginning portion of the introduction, and then he talks now about the main theme of the book.
فإن الزمان قد تبين للعاقل تغيره ولاح لللبيب تبدله حيث يبس ضرعه بعد الغزارة وذبل فرعه بعد النضارة ونحل عوده بعد الرطوبة وبسع مذاقه بعد العجوبة فنبغ به أقوام يدعون التمكن من العقل باستعمال ضد ما يوجب العقل من شهوات صدورهم وترك ما يوجبه نفس العقل بهجسات قلوبهم جعلوا أساس العقل الذي يعقدون عليه عند المعضلات النفاق والمداهنة وفروعه عند ورود النائبات حسن اللباس والفصاحة وزعموا أن من أحكم هذه الأشياء الأربعة فهو العاقل الذي يجب الاقتداء به ومن تخلف عن إحكامها فهو الأنوط الذي يجب الإزدرار عنه.
So he mentions now the reason for writing this book, and he says that time has witnessed many changes. And remember, he died 354 Hijri, so he's only 3 centuries after the time of the Prophet Muhammad. But he's saying, SubhanAllah, how our world has changed in this time. And he's saying that an intelligent person, a thoughtful person, a reflective person will notice that much of the good that was in the world, much of the virtue is leaving, is dwindling. And he gives these different metaphors. He talks about, like the udder of the cow being full of milk and how it has dried out. So he says that this is something that a wise person will notice, that there are changes in society, there are changes in the culture around us, there are changes in the time period in which we live. And if you think about even our own lives, how much time do you spend reflecting on the changes that you have witnessed in your life? This is a sign of wisdom. Right? If you think about our own lives, we have witnessed the greatest changes that have happened in human history. Especially those of us who still remember seeing a typewriter. You can remember this. Seeing an actual typewriter, right? Or seeing, You'll see the icon of the telephone. You will not know what the icon refers to. What does that phone look like? Where you actually spin your finger around to dial somebody. You know? Did you ever see how you have to do that to call somebody? These things that you witness, and then what the sound is when you dial up on the internet and you have this connection that goes, right? It makes this noise to connect to the internet. So today I'm like, what is this guy talking about? But we've witnessed the change from that, and now we're in the age of social media, we're in the age of artificial intelligence, we're in the age of, so many different changes. And what is the effect of that on human morality? What is the effect of that on the human mind? Do we reflect on that? What is the effect of these changes on human society? One of the problems we have with technology is that people feel as soon as we can do something, let's do it, and there's no thoughts about how this affects people. There was a book written in the 70s in America, a very influential book, by a man named Neil Postman, called Abusing Ourselves to Death. And he talked about how American society, again, this was written more than 40 years ago, 50 years ago. So imagine when he started, if you saw the changes now. He talked about how the entertainment industry, the different changes like television, whatever, how society was transforming to become an image-based culture, from being a text-based culture to become an image-based culture, and how American society was becoming functionally illiterate. Functionally illiterate means, yes, we can read a word, we make a sentence out, but can an actual person read a book cover to cover and understand the meaning of it? Like, do people actually spend their time reading books? And even I remember when I was in high school, people in the class saying, I just go on the Spark Notes, or I just look at what the summary of the book is, or I watch the movie that the book is the movie that's based on the book. Like, people already were becoming functionally illiterate. So what is the effect of that on a culture's collective intellect? What is the effect of that on the author? The productive capacity of the intellect within a civilization. These different changes that are taking place. That's one of the things we have to think about. And this is why it's very important for us as Muslims, if we want to revive Islamic civilization, one of the things we have to revive is the connection to reading. And that's very difficult to do in the modern pace of things, because it's so easy to go on your phone and to do zombie scrolling. You say, today, inshallah, I'm going to spend 1 hour reading this book. It's great book. Wow, it looks so nice, such a nice cover. And I'm sitting on the desk and you're like, inshallah, I ran out of time. I spent all the time on it. Okay? So, what happens now? A person's mind is changing. And we know from a neuroscience perspective, and a critical neuroscientist, so this is one of the things that interests me, the brain adapts to how you use it, right? The brain adapts to your activities. It's called neuroplasticity. So, there is changes within the connections within the brain, within the wiring within the brain. So, your circuitry is feeding it this kind of like immediate gratification. This constantly cycling through doing the zombie scrolling, you become more addicted to that. And your capacity to have concentration, to reflect on deeper topics will continue to diminish. Your capacity to think about big ideas, to critically engage, to read a book and really immerse yourself in the meanings of that book, it will start to diminish. Because of how you're using your brain. Now, what if a society does this collectively? What are going to be the outcomes? Okay? And this is very interesting because if you look at critical thinking, the term critical thinking in the West, it was actually, coined in recent history in America. John Dewey, the American philosopher, he coined this term. And the idea behind it, when people start talking about critical thinking, is that critical thinking will lead to a perfect democracy because every citizen in the democracy will understand how to think critically and problem solve, and then they will all vote, based on whatever is in the best interest of the society. And that's the big idea. And our education system will teach all the students to think critically, and that's it. We'll create this utopia. when I give the presentation on this, I mentioned this, and then the next slide I usually put up the pictures of all the current world leaders and say, how did the utopia compare to what exists today? There's no critical thinking. The society, the politics are not driven by critical thinking. They're driven, first of all, they're driven by large corporations that fund the politicians that they want in order to create policies that will protect the interests of the rich and the powerful. That is how the society operates. So the whole critical thinking idea was just a fantasy. It didn't actually materialize the way they wanted. But one of the things that's connected to that is society continues to become functionally illiterate. And that's one of the things that we have to realize as an Islamic civilization. We are best positioned to contribute to this revival, right? And this is the whole message here that we want to share with the broader human family the values and the lofty ideas that we can contribute. Right? The message of Islam uplifts human beings. Imam Abu Sufyan Ali Nadwi wrote a beautiful work, one of his celebrated works is What Did the World Lose with the Decline of Muslims? Just from the title itself, you see this attitude. What did the world lose because of the decline of Muslims? Muslims had hoped to contribute something so beautiful, so positive to the rest of the world, because our civilization was based on the value structure you mentioned, but including related to this point, our civilization began with the word Iqra, read. It began with this word. So even Western historians talked about Islamic civilization as being a civilization of knowledge. Franz Rosenthal talked about, he wrote the book Knowledge Triumphant. He described Islamic civilization. Knowledge triumphant. And knowledge was one of the pinnacle values of Islamic civilization. So this is something that we have to recognize and come back to. So he mentions these analogies. Now in his time, what is he dealing with? He's seeing that there's a change in the way people are approaching the concept of the intellect, and they think that the intellect, he says the things that they take to be matters of the intellect are actually the opposite of what the intellect is. And as we can see from what we're discussing today, it's the same thing in our times. Now in his times, he says, شهوات صدورهم, the desires of their hearts. Shahawat, this is one of the important differences here between the Islamic view of the aql and you could say the view of modern culture. From the Islamic perspective, one has to learn moral discipline and spiritual discipline. One has to learn how to master one's desires. One has to learn how to master one's desires. We mentioned from the perspective of liberalism, the fundamental value of society is I want to be free to do whatever I want. In other words, I want to be free to follow my desires. Indulge in my desires. Whatever fulfills my desires, let me do it. Don't tell me what to do. Don't tell me what to think. Right? That's the attitude. That's the mentality behind it. So that's why the entertainment industry becomes the most important industry in our culture, because it's suiting people's desires. So how much are teachers, educators paid, and how much are entertainers paid? And how can a society ever flourish if its entertainers are paid more than its educators? It's a big aspect, big characteristic here. So he talks about this idea of just feeding into the shahawat. So again, what he said 1,000 years ago, this is relevant. There's incredible wisdom. And then he mentions four things. So he said they made the foundations of the aql four things. The two that are that they made the foundation are al-nifaq and mujahada. Both of these relate to the idea of compromise. So nifaq, or hypocrisy, right? Somebody claims to be Muslim, but their actions don't match what they're claiming. The actions are not lining up, right? And maybe even there's two levels of nifaq, right? There's akbar and asghar. There's greater nifaq and lesser nifaq. If their actions are not lining up, this is a lesser nifaq. If they're actually trying to deceive others, they're not even believing in Islam, this will be the greater mistake. When we look at the Muslim world today, and we see, what is happening, the genocide of the Muslim, and how much how many factions have sold their values in order to completely align with the interests of Western imperialism. This is a form of defense. So we see that is applying as well today. The concept of mudahana, the concept of compromise on your values, this is the inferiority complex that we talk about today as well. I was talking to one brother a few years ago who was going through a crisis of faith. And one of the things that he told me that he really reflected on is that we have an inferiority complex that is affecting Muslims today. And that is connected to the idea of Islam. The idea that you have to give something up, and your Islam is holding you back. How many people talk like this? Especially actually, if you look at some of the rhetoric that comes from certain factions in Pakistan, this is common. Like people say they should just have this idea that, we need to be less religious, less Islamic, they have this idea that Islam is holding us back. Right? And we need to westernize in order to advance ourselves. And from everything that we've seen, it's actually, that is the opposite. We need to rediscover our own intellectual heritage and our own intellectual tradition. The key to advancing ourselves is not simply to assimilate into a culture that is engaged in the gratification of desires. The key to advancing ourselves is to rediscover the divine guidance in our lives and recover that important message. So, the gap, hypocrisy, and mudahana, compromise, these are the branches, these are the roots of how people think of the intellect. And the branches that they think of when they think about the intellect are fashion and fancy speech. Fancy clothes, fancy speech. And so we mentioned, I think 2 classes ago, you still have this attitude today where people look at, they look at the outfit, right? They look at a person wearing a suit and a tie, appearing on an interview, right? And using fancy language, and they're so impressed. Wow! He says, Piers Morgan says, what is a proportionate response? Oh, wow, so intellectual. It's justifying something that is the most basic, rudimentary moral truth. It's justifying something that violates the most basic moral truth, which is killing children as well. Right? So, where is the outcome? This is how people think of intelligence today. So, I personally found it really interesting that what he mentioned 1,000 years ago, we're still seeing the same thing today. And so these are the foundations that people have taken, and these are the branches. The rest of the entire book is going to mention what is the Islamic branches and foundations of the intellect. It's going to mention 50 different aspects of the intellect in this book. That's the whole way in which the book is structured. Now,
فلما رأيت الرعاع من العالم يغترون بأفعالهم والهمج من الناس يقتدون بأمثالهم أعاني ذلك إلى تصنيف كتاب خفيف يشتمل متضمنه على معنى دقيق مما يحتاج إليه العقلاء في أيامهم من معرفة الأحوال في أوقاتهم ليكون كالتذكرة لذوي الحجى عند حضرتهم وكالمعين لأولي النهى عند غيبتهم يفوق العالم به أقرانه والحافظ به أترابه يكون النديم الصادق للعاقل في الخلوات والمؤنس الحافظ له في الخلوات إن خص به من يحب من إخوانه لم يفتقده من ديوانه وإن استبد به دون أوليائه فاق به على نظرائه. أبين فيه ما يحسن للعاقل استعماله من الخصال المحمودة ويقبح به إتيانه من الخلال المذمومة وينقص في لزوم الاختصاص وترك الإمعان في الإكثار ليخف على حامله وتعيه أذن مستمعه أن فنون الأخبار وأنواع الأشعار إذا استقصى المجتهد في إطالتها فليس يرجو النهاية إلى غايتها، ومن لم يرجو التمكن من الإكمال في الإكثار كان حقيقا أن يقنع بالاختصار. والله الموفق للسداد والهادي إلى الرشاد، وإياه أسأل إصلاح الأسرار وترك المعاقبة على الأوزار، إنه جواد كريم رؤوف رحيم.
So he says that when I saw that the masses were being affected by this rhetoric, they were following along with it, and just trying to imitate these people and what they think to be matters of intelligence, he said I wanted to compile Kitab al-Hafiz, a light book. But at our time, people don't think of this as a light book. How many people? So this book is like 400 pages. So this is a light book. You guys understand that? This is a light book. Now we're in a generation where 1 hour lecture is a heavy thing. 5-second TikTok is something light. SubhanAllah. So if you look at the works of our classical Islamic scholars, honestly, till today, it astonishes me. No matter how much I study these works, like I don't know how they wrote them in the times that they lived in. Like, first of all, they didn't have computers. They didn't have the ability to look up all the references like the way that we do. Like, I can look up a hadith in 2 seconds, right? I can look up a quote from a scholar in 2 seconds. I use Shamina, Sunnah.com, look up verse. They didn't have these things. And they wrote massive volumes. And they're not just writing like based on, not reading anything. They're writing that, and you read their works and they're quoting out what this scholar said and what that person said, and they're bringing out subtle points from books that are also massive volumes. So honestly, I just don't understand how they did it. Maybe it's because of the culture in which we live in, that it's astonishing to me. The more I think about it, I feel like I will never be able to understand how it was that they did this. Maybe it's Allah in the afterlife. It's something that Allah will do. How did these previous scholars do this immense amount of contribution that they consider this Kitab al-Hafiz? SubhanAllah. So he mentions he compiled this work, and it's something that he wants it to be a resource that the intelligent people can go back to as a reminder for them. What are the qualities of the intelligent? And this is something that everyone should think about in their life, no matter what stage or age you are at in your life. Always think about what are the qualities of wisdom, and am I embodying these qualities? And what are ways in which I can increase the wisdom in my life? This is something we don't tend to think about today. We don't tend to think like this. And it's a pattern of thought that is so important for our growth. And to understand, how do I spend my time? Who do I spend my time with? What qualities of the intelligent, the wise, the different qualities he's mentioned, what are the qualities that I need to develop within myself? So the believer should constantly be striving to improve and to develop these different qualities. So he mentions that in this work that he's going to clarify what are the qualities that are praiseworthy, and as well he's going to talk about what are the things that one needs to stay away from and abstain from in order to develop the quality of being